This week on A to Z Running, we wrap up our series about getting started or restarted by talking about how we should expect to feel, from fatigue to soreness to aches and pains.
In the world of running, so much happened that we aren't even sure how to tease it.
Want to guess how many world records fell in the last 2 weeks?
And then there's Shelby Houlihan's return and all the talk around that.
We just need to get this started.
So, all this and more on A to Z Running.
Hey everyone, welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching and training services. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and you can learn everything you need to know about our services at AtoZrunning.com and follow us in the places we're sharing content, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, primarily. All right. So you know that we like to spend a moment or two every now and then sharing updates about what we are doing in running, and in part because a lot of what we're doing in running involves running into a lot of you, which is great. We love those things. Not always great when what we're doing in running involves running into things that are less pleasant than all of you. And so that's the summarizing statement of why Zach is no longer going to be running for at least several weeks, if not longer, once we get the rest of our x-rays and scans done to find out what all is actually wrong with Zach's leg and possibly his other leg, although that one's not as painful, so we'll see. And if anyone is curious what I'm talking about, the short answer to the question is the craziest thing that has ever happened in my experience of all of the years that I have spent running, and I don't know that I've talked to anyone where anything quite like this has happened. Running down the side of the road, some dude didn't like the fact that I was running on the road where he was driving, so he got out of his car, he beat me up, including kicking me, punching me, and stepping on me. And then he got back in his car and drove away. And now I think my leg is broken. And the x-rays have said fracture, and who knows what the soft tissue damage is. So, moving on. Zach will not be running for some amount of time in the near future.
That's a very sad story.
It's a very crazy story.
It's a crazy story.
That's for sure. All right. How about you, Andy?
Well, I have been getting some incremental growth and no leaps, no big news.
But you're running.
I'm running, so I'm still happy about that. But I have to say, I was really concerned about Zach's situation and just thinking about being a pedestrian on the whole, just the dangers that we face and some of the road rage that we might experience from people in motor vehicles. And, we run on places with no shoulders, and we give people the benefit of the doubt when they stop their car and they get out. So I think as runners, we really need to think about these situations that could possibly happen. I don't know what you could do any differently, but just maybe not be trusting of a person at all. Zero amounts of trust for drivers.
Could be armed and dangerous.
No.
But it is very exciting that you are continuing to progress. Mm-hmm. And we're moving on from Zach's story. And in particular, the importance of our constant refrain that you do what your body can handle and no more. And Andy has been learning that lesson the hardest way possible, which is just such a slow progression over time, but it is progressing. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be able to at least talk to you about some of that in time. All right. Well, we have much more exciting things to talk about, and so let's go ahead and start all of that by sharing with you some thoughts around how you should be feeling and how you should not be feeling when starting or restarting your running. All right, talking about our latest content series, we have been sharing with you what it looks like when you're starting running or restarting running, and that can be from any circumstance. And so as I enter that phase myself here in the near future, we'll be adopting some of these lessons personally also. And that means you can be coming back from illness, you can be coming back from injury, you can come back from a deliberate and intentional break, but or just starting this thing for the very first time. But there are certain things we experience that are, you could say, predictable. And so how do we cope with those things, or at least anticipate them well? We talked about motivation last time. And motivation is difficult here because it seems like that would be an easy thing. You're starting something fresh, motivation is high, which is true, but motivation declines very rapidly once that freshness wears off. And because the freshness wore off, but the goodness of like the well-established routine is not quite there yet, that's a really difficult place to be with motivation.
And part of the conversation last week was about how we need to have realistic expectations. And the story that we tell ourselves is extremely important. So that would mean that we need to frame things in a realistic but positive and growth-minded way. And part of that is understanding how things are going to be feeling so that we know how to process through them and keep on the good work that's happening.
Right on. So then the first time we shared a thought about this, we were talking about movement, and that was a couple episodes ago. And so if you missed that one, just thinking about the process of teaching and reteaching our bodies how to move well, and then making that a regular thing that we do so our bodies can move well right from the beginning. And that is so important because as we think about runners trying to do this thing in a way that is any goal, and I want to enjoy it. I want to be able to do it for a long time, like be the lifelong runner. I want to be healthy. I want to have good fitness in general. I want to achieve performance goals. Like all of these things are all going to be best achieved by a well-practiced running mechanic. So we think that's important. And there's layers to that. And we talked about it last time, or the first time. Now, this week, and in particular, this final stage of our series is to address then how we probably should be feeling when we're doing this thing in the early stages. And also how we should not be feeling, because there are certain things that are bad signs, that are red flags. So whether you're doing this for the very first time or you've done this many, many times, these are the things that we need to be thinking about. Mm-hmm. Starting off with the moral of the story.
Tell us the moral of the story.
Physiological stress. Stress is, by definition, taking something beyond our comfort zone. And so in order to achieve growth, we must have some amount of stress. That is a human reality. It can be in all spheres of life, right? You have to take the thing, the normal thing, and you have to push it in some way. And that's a kind of stress. And so physiologically, we have to do something that's not going to be super comfortable, or at least is not going to be homeostasis.
When we're using the word stress here, we're using it in the way that Zach just described and not in the way where we're worrying about things. We're using it as a word that would mean something like stimulus as well. So many of you are familiar with science words that mean like stress on your system that you react to and adapt to. But some of you might be thinking, your minds might be wired to go to stress equals worry. Stress equals bad. And this is not the case.
Yeah, and fundamentally, that's a poor social reality that we have conflated those terms, because stress is just the thing that's happening. My reaction to stress is where I go all sorts of directions, positive, negative, or otherwise. Too much stress, and so you'll hear phrases like toxic stress. And most of the time when they're using the phrase toxic stress in the world today, they're talking about emotional or cognitive stress. Too much stress is very, very difficult to cope with, and it pushes us to the point of pathology in some sense or another. And when I say pathology, I mean like anything that is out of the ordinary, that things have been disturbed. And so that happens physiologically as much as it happens in any other sense. There's a kind of toxic physiological stress also when we overstress ourselves, and that is where things like injury and burnout and such come from. We'll talk a little bit about that. But also, in principle, stress is the only way to grow. And so it is managing the right amount of stress in the right ways at the right times that is how we grow in life in general. So what does that actually mean then as I'm running, and how do I know that it's the right thing that I'm feeling? That's the big question. Because even though it's true that it doesn't it doesn't feel like marshmallows and rainbows all the time, it actually should feel reasonably good. Like, you shouldn't feel miserable when you're
I want
running.
things to feel like marshmallows. Now that's in my head, I kind of like that word picture. I want to feel like marshmallows.
And rainbows.
And rainbows.
I was thinking of Lucky Charms. Obviously, I was thinking of Lucky Charms when I said that.
Because he's a runner and he thinks of cereal.
I guess. So the question here now that we're going to answer is, what should I feel and what should I do when I don't feel that way? And we have essentially 3 categories to address. First, there is an answer to the question, what should I feel? And it comes from the timeless words of Arthur Lydiard when he, and via Barry McGee in my experience, because I didn't actually know Arthur Lydiard personally, but Barry McGee used to say this to me routinely when I was working with him: train, don't strain. It's principle number 1.
The best advice ever.
Train, don't strain. So there's your Lydiardism for the day. And what they mean when they say that, and they're not the only ones who have said it over the years, what they mean is training does not mean you are distressed. Training just means you are pushing the right amount. And so there's ways to define that then in the specific dynamics of what we're doing running that help us achieve it. And it's not that complicated. And so that's one of the things I like about it. Like, running should be a thing we generally enjoy most of the time. Sure, there's going to be moments you may not, and that's probably okay too. But most of the time we should. So
it's a great goal to have if you're not experiencing that, is to try to find a way to enjoy the running thing if you're going to do it.
Train, don't strain. And if you feel like you're straining all the time, just don't.
And if you're beginning,
just go easier.
Because this is something we wanted to address, was that new runners, right? So if you feel like every time you're running, you're experiencing too much stress, too much strain, then you're going to want to modify it. Do more walking versus running. And it's okay? Like, it's good for you to be building and growing as you need to, as your body tells you it needs to.
Our 2-step guiding principle to all situations where a runner is not feeling the way we feel like the runner should. This is specifically when we're coaching athletes, but we suggest it on air all the time, is step 1, reduce intensity. If you're not feeling great, run easier. Step 2, reduce volume. Those are the only 2 things you can reduce. And so that's not to say those are the only things that you do, but if I am saying I'm not feeling great, whatever the context is, our reaction almost always immediately is going to be run easier. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't solve the problem, then run shorter, at least for now. So let's talk about the specifics. Here you go. There's 2 sides of each of these coins. How should you feel? How should you not feel? The first one is manageable. You should feel like everything you're doing is manageable. And the converse to that is you should not feel like you are at your limit all the time. Like, I'm barely able to get through this. You don't want to feel that way. At no point in time should you be running and say to yourself, I can't keep this up, unless you're in a race and you're really trying to go all out.
Or you're doing like a stride, right? You're doing like 10 seconds.
The same thing. Yeah, that's not.
But you're not trying to keep it up.
Right. That's by design. Yeah, that's a good point. But no, in a general sense, everything has to be contextualized when you talk about this kind of stuff. In a general sense, you should never be running and say, I have to slow down in order to finish this run, because that means either you were running too hard. Remember our 2-step process. Either you were running too high of an effort, or you were running too long of a duration. And the effort's the first thing we look at. So,
and that's also why we don't say you're running too fast, because that is not always going to be the same thing. And if you were to think of it like, I need to run a certain pace, then most likely what you would do is just run shorter. So it's good to be thinking about what your body needs and what the best decision is for that workout. So just putting that out there too, because you'll be like, that's not too fast of a pace for me. That's not, because based on X, Y, and Z mathematical equation, like I can run that. Like I should be, and I hear people say this all the time, I should be able to run that pace. I should be able to run that pace.
Peg that. Phrase number 1 that you know Your mindset is going somewhere that is not going to help you. I should be able to run that pace.
And I admittedly have said that before. I'm like, and Zach's heard, that's why I'm admitting it. And I think it's always good to have these honest conversations where I'm like, that pace should not have felt that way.
Andy says that almost every time she finishes a run.
That's not true at all. He's using hyperbole. Here I am saying at all. We're using these, kind of phraseology that's not so helpful. No, superlative, yeah. Anyway, I've done it before, and I know it's a temptation. I've heard it a ton. So if we're able to, especially when we're starting and restarting, get rid of that, then we are going to be able to make adjustments accordingly that are going to serve us better.
Listen, people. I am just as guilty as anyone else of that, which is the initial reason why I stopped wearing a watch when I run. I do not time my runs ever anymore and haven't now for over a year. And why? Because I couldn't stop my mental reaction to the run. I finish the run. I see the pace. Even if I wasn't paying any attention to it, I see the pace or I see how far I ran in the amount of time, which is usually what it was. And then I would calculate the pace because I couldn't help myself. And then I would immediately have some kind of a reaction to that. But that reaction is not helping me. So I stopped wearing a watch. And I tell you what, I don't have the choice anymore. So it doesn't even matter.
And I do want to say, because I think it's helpful to have some evidence, because people are like, but, in our heads, we always want to hold on to the thing that makes us feel safe. And I think a lot of us like data. It helps us feel like we're in control. So I do want to mention, as evidence for getting rid of his watch, he was able to run a marathon PR without training with a watch. He was able to run a 10-mile PR without wearing a watch. So I think it's important, not just like in the race, in training too.
Yeah, I don't wear watches in races either.
Right.
I don't ever know how fast I'm running.
So
anymore,
it did not hold him back to not wear a watch. It held him back to wear the watch. So I think it's an interesting reflection.
We will compile at some point in time our complete perspective around the idea of what it truly means to run by effort intuitively, without data, without watches, and make the case for it.
But I do want to mention too, for those of you that are considering training with us, or considering having us be your coaches, or
we will take your watch and we will smash it with a hammer.
I'm saying the
That's
opposite.
Day one.
I'm saying the opposite. We're not requiring our athletes to throw their watches away.
But if they ever post on Strava, we excommunicate them.
That's also
from their
not
country
true.
Of birth.
That's also not true.
Okay. I guess I've been a little confused here for some time. Okay, well, back to the point of our topic at the moment. These are important considerations. There's a lot that's going to influence this kind of stuff. And the main thing to remember is I should not be feeling like I can't keep doing the thing that I'm doing, because that means I'm overdoing it. And there are two kinds of dynamics that are most common when you overdid something on a run. If you overdid the intensity, you often feel kind of ill after the run. And there's a reason for that. There's a couple different reasons for that, but there's a biological reason for that, because if you exceeded your aerobic capacity, then you're experiencing a kind of
byproduct,
kind of result of lactic buildup as a result of ions in your bloodstream. Anyway, so yeah, there's a biological reason for that. And then when you exceed volume in terms of running further than your body is ready to handle, you tend to increase or decrease general motivation throughout the day after the run. You tend to feel like an
ache, really, too.
Yeah, well, that's the other side. So you have this sense of like, I don't want to do anything anymore. I just want to sit, because your body is trying to tell you you need to rest because you just did something that was too crazy. And so it's a central nervous system thing. It's actually called central nervous fatigue, but I'm trying to explain how it feels in general. And so when you experience central nervous fatigue, then you're just kind of like, ugh. But also the body aches. In particular, it's not like this acute thing. You don't feel like, oh, my heel is aching today, although you may. But also it's just like in general, my body just feels bad. And that usually means that you did too much running. And so in some combination of those two, it usually is the case anyway. It's not usually one or the other. It's usually some amount of both. So those are things you should not be feeling ever in training. Now, again, when you're doing races, when you're doing competition, and the goal is to expend everything I can, you're going to feel these kinds of things. and more power to you. Do it. But don't do that in training. You're harming yourself. So what should you do about it? When you feel like you're at your limits, when you feel like it's not manageable, what do you do to make sure that you're staying manageable? First of all, if you're running a run and you're saying that I can't keep this up kind of thing, and you have to slow down before you finish the run, run slower next time. And it's really, I mean, just learn the lesson. You probably did not cause yourself any great harm in that one run. So next time, just run slower, especially at the start. And maybe you'll get back to the point here soon where you're running, quote, as fast as you were hoping to originally. But that thinking is not productive to building fitness. And so don't worry about it. Just run what your body can handle, and then you'll be set. Just don't make a habit of constantly running too hard and having to slow down before the end of runs.
I've said this before in the podcast, but I think that it's helpful to hear someone else say it. So many of you know this already, but it's another affirmation of doing the right thing. So if you are in a run, a steady state run, for instance, and you are in a slightly pressed, elevated run, and you realize that you are pushing too much, you're giving too much effort early on, feel free to dial it back and find a manageable rhythm to finish out the duration of the run. There is a very strong tendency for runners to continue because they don't want their splits to show that they're slowing down because it looks like a failed run. Get that out of your head. Get that out of your mind, your system, your thinking, okay? You made an adjustment, you pivoted in order to achieve the proper stimulus to help you grow. Slowing down was the decision that you made in order to do that. There are many who will just continue to press on and push harder and harder, and it ends up being like a tempo or a near max effort because they want to conclude the run without slowing down, or they'll just cut it short. So as we're thinking about how we want to feel, I think it's important to bring up being able to make that decision, pivot, and know that we might have positive splits.
Right on. And essentially what Andy's articulating is the two sides of the coin too, because there's one side of the coin which says slow down so you can finish the duration. There's the other side of the coin that says stop early or stop the kind of effort you're doing when your body can't handle it anymore, because that's as much as your body was able to give. And you need to have both of those in your arsenal.
That's true. Yeah.
To be able to.
And it also depends on the purposes. So for instance, a fartlek, you might feel like it's time to be done and you just stop. You're not going to like run half effort, it's for fartlek. But if you're in a steady and you can salvage the duration, you're going to want to do that. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because it is different depending on the purposes of the run as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And anecdotes abound that underscore how we go wrong with these kinds of things in so many ways. But I guess the one that I will share because it's just an amazing contrast. It's a perfect contrast, actually. A friend of mine who has many years of experience coaching was once telling me a story about he was observing another workout that others were doing. And then this contrasts with a time that a different coach was observing Lydiard doing a workout with one of his athletes. So my friend said he was watching this workout and they were doing some kind of interval repeats. And one of the athletes goes to the coach and says, my knee is killing me. Like it feels like it's going to explode. And the coach's response is, if you stop now, you might as well quit. Like it's just a sign of weakness. Like, wow. Okay.
Thanks.
And then contrast that with Lydiard, who this coach walks up while Lydiard's at the track with one of his athletes. And the coach says, oh, what's he doing out there? And he's like, oh, he's just, he's doing repeats or intervals. I don't know what word he used, but he's doing repeats. And the coach says, oh, how many? And Lydiard's like, I don't know. And he's like, well, how fast? And he's like, I don't know. I'm not timing it. And then Lydiard turns to the guy and goes, oh, by the way, how far is this track anyway? And the coach thinks this guy, Lydiard, is the worst coach on the planet. Now, you tell me which of those two examples shows better coaching. And so the spirit of the thing. You do what your body needs, not what you want it to be able to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, and there's a second side of this. We talked about intensity, but what about with duration, if I can't finish the full duration of a run, like I'm getting to the end of the run, it's like I have to walk because this is too much for my body to handle. Then the first step is you slow down. As I mentioned, every time our first answer is going to be slow down because I usually can handle an effort if it's lower for longer. But let's say that's still not enough. It's also not unreasonable to just take a step back in volume and say my body just wasn't quite ready for that yet. So I'm going to do the same thing over again next time, or I'm going to reduce it a little bit next time and then try, to build it back up the next time around after that. And so you take your time in training getting to where you're trying to be, and you let your body adjust and adapt as you go.
Because many of you live in our region, not all of you, probably not even half of you, but half of you live in our region. Also, when you have a snowfall and you're running in 3 inches of snow, it changes how that long run feels. So there is also new stimulus that are added at times that can change how your body is feeling by the end. So if you're having to push off differently, you're having to drive your knee differently, you're having to use your feet. If something is fatiguing more than usual, you might have to decrease a week if the weather is different or there is some other kind of stimulus that you're not used to.
It's true. Context matters. And we're speaking very generally here, but context matters. So if that first category was, in essence, making you feel like, are you guys telling us that we should just always feel great all the time? Because I thought you said that wasn't the case. These next 2 categories are the acceptable types of not feeling great that we allow for as runners, or should allow for. So let's talk about fatigue for a moment. Lydiard used the phrase, and I liked it, pleasant fatigue, pleasantly fatiguing or pleasant fatigue. And we contrast that with how you should not feel, which is exhausted. You don't want to feel exhausted as a distance runner. That is a terrible meme that has been built over the years, a stereotype of like, I know that I'm in the heart of marathon training because I'm like walking around in this like fog of near deadness. And, they got like all the great memes of people like just trudging into their office or their school and they're barely able to stay awake and stuff. That's not good.
It's not healthy.
That is not good marathon training or any training. So don't do that. So you should feel a kind of pleasant fatigue, but that is not the same thing as exhaustion. And here's how we would describe it. You finish a run, you're going to be tired. Yes, because you're running and you're stressing your system physiologically, neurologically, and all of that. And so that's okay. But that tiredness should not persist and should not affect the quality of your life. So if you are so fatigued from a run that you have to spend the rest of the day just chilling, and everyone in your family is like, hey, we want to go do this thing, and you're like, oh, I'm so exhausted from my run this morning, that may be a little too much. That may have been a little more fatigue than you desire.
Or you stayed up too late the night before and made other decisions. I know,
There's
but
many other things.
But that's what I'm saying, because you need to evaluate. So you conclude a run and you have a day where you are a zombie. Then you think, oh man, was the run too much, or was it that I only got 5 hours of sleep the night before my long run?
The answer is yes. Because you only got 5
Right.
hours of sleep the night before, the
That's
run
true,
was
yeah.
too much.
Yeah.
And this is, so our training is always going to be in the moment. We can't ever take it at an ideal. It's only ever what we have in the moment. And that also informs things like, if I am feeling tired all the time, but I feel like I'm really slowing things down and I've cut it pretty short and I'm still feeling tired all the time, well, running's not the only thing that makes us feel tired.
Yep.
And so we have to keep in mind, how am I doing with hydration and nutrition? How's my sleep? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, when's the last time I had labs?
Right. My general life stress, we have found in the things that we've been reading about the impact of cognitive and emotional stress on our physiology, that it's constant.
It's big.
It's huge.
If people are going through a move, a job change, a divorce, or relational stress, it changes how their body feels. And there's a fatigue, a stress, a deep down weariness.
Lots of considerations. So As we noted, again, we will say the tiredness is acceptable in the moment of I finished a run, I'm feeling a little bit tired, but you should be able to bounce back quickly. And when you can't, that to us is suggesting adjustment is needed or examining these other areas of life. But the point is, what we control about the training says the training shouldn't leave me feeling that way by itself. And so what should you do? Well, first, you reduce effort, and second, take a small step back in your overall volume so that your body can handle it. And again, you're going to say, oh, you guys are kind of sounding like you're repeating yourself. We're actually doing that on purpose because the lesson is the imperative. We have the same approach regardless of what we're doing, which is to say, no matter what mistakes I make, I have a very simple solution to them in my training, and that is to get the effort right. And if getting the effort right is not helping enough, then I adjust my volume to make sure that it's manageable before I try to scale it up. Okay, last one. Tightness/soreness stuff. Mild tightness or an occasional bit of little bit of soreness is acceptable. It's going to happen for the same reasons all stated. But lingering soreness or ongoing tightness in an acute sense in a particular area is not acceptable. That means that something is amiss. However, the solutions here are not always the same as the ones above because now we get into some complexities. So let's talk about what happens here with like tightness and soreness. When you're stressing your system generally, wherever there's a weak link, it's going to experience the stress in a greater sense than other things. And so if you've got a weakness in terms of like muscles, if you've got a immobility in terms of like joints, all these kinds of things are going to accentuate the stress in certain places more than others. So a little bit of tightness here and there, a little bit of soreness, that's always going to happen. But it's almost always giving you some kind of signal about something out of homeostasis.
This is something that I've learned on my long journey of many journeys. I recently, anytime my hamstring has felt extra tight, I just don't even attempt to run at all. And I'm not telling you that that's what you should do. I'm just sharing my journey. I've had a hamstring injury since last May. So anytime I feel it tight, I just do the other things. And then if it's able to feel good, like it's loosening up, then I will go ahead and try something. But until I don't just go, until it feels like it's safe, I don't run. I just say no. And it's hard to do, guys.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, I'll just try it.
Just see. Maybe it'll feel better.
Just see. Yeah, maybe it will loosen up as I go.
That's the one.
Which sometimes it does. Like, there are some things that do loosen up as you go. But this is something that I've told myself to deceive myself into thinking I can run when it's not good to do so.
Yes. So let's talk about that a little bit more because you're going to experience some tightness. You're going to experience some soreness here and there. Mild, acute soreness is understandable. General soreness, like my upper leg is sore broadly, that's a bad sign. That is not a good thing. But I've got like this sore spot in my quad or in my hamstring. I did this run that was a little bit a little bit longer or a little bit faster than my day-to-day run, and I'm feeling a little bit sore afterward. Okay, understandable. How do you feel the next day? Is it still there? And the next time you run, is it going away or is it hanging out? That's one question to ask yourself. But also, anytime there is something other than I feel great after a run, do something about it. Don't just assume it's just going to go away by itself. It may, which is great. But do a little extra mobility stuff. Do some rolling or some myofascial release stuff. And as soon as something is around longer than like 2 days, 2 or 3 days, where you have a soreness or a tightness, then start trying to address that from a stability, strength, and coordination approach as well. Like, I may have an imbalance here. I may have something that's a little bit weak here. I'm going to reinforce the things that help stabilize my different patterns of movement. And if you understand when this spot isn't feeling this way, maybe it's this thing, you can address it very specifically. If you don't, go see somebody who knows that kind of stuff. Physical therapists are great at this kind of thing. Oh, your hamstring's really sore there. Let me see you stand. Let me see you do a one-legged squat. Oh, it looks clear to me that you have a strength imbalance. So there's some ways to address that. Mm-hmm. That's good. You can do a lot of that kind of stuff yourself. You don't have to wait until an appointment is on the schedule to start trying to figure some of those things out. Google it a little bit even. Like, how do I check my strength balance in my hamstrings? And someone's going to have an example and that you can do in front of a mirror, and you'll be able to potentially. And also, by the way, I should say, it's helpful when someone else is watching you for those kinds of things because they'll see it better than you will yourself. But anyway, you can do something, and you should do some amount of, like, the best way to say this is a few minutes today and a few minutes tomorrow is a lot better than having to spend a week of therapy to get something to stop, feeling badly. So take the few minutes after the run when you're like, it's a little sore, I'm going to do something about it right now.
The awesome thing about runners is that they become good at being uncomfortable. The bad thing about runners is that sometimes we ignore mild aches and pains without addressing them because we're good at being uncomfortable. So it's important to take a moment, take some inventory of the body, and not ignore those little niggles that turn into big things later on.
True that. So in that sense, we have to anticipate that those things are absolutely going to happen, and we have to have a plan of action. We can't just shrug whenever it is and say, it's just probably going to go away. Because maybe it does. And maybe it goes away 9 times out of 10 without ever having to do anything. But it did happen for a reason. And so at a minimum, to just try to help my body get past that quicker is not harming my goals here. And it doesn't usually have to take very long.
Just some general considerations when you're restarting running that I think are good to address, because this is part of the conversation we're having here today. Running on a flat surface when you're beginning running again is really important, because as you're developing strengths, you don't want to be running on a side of a road that has a slant, because that does generally, as you're building your musculoskeletal strength, turn into problems later. We want to develop properly. Especially if you're someone who's starting from zero or from a really long break. You might even drive to a track. You might choose to be on a treadmill if things are really sketchy outside, because you don't have the musculoskeletal strength to be able to turn your ankle here and there because your ankle mobility and strength is not there yet. Or you just find a stretch that's more smooth and solid as a surface. So that's a tip that I have learned and I have practiced for years with injuries coming and going.
Yeah, and the principle behind it is try to avoid the same thing all the time. And so that running on that slant on the road, if you're going to go to a track, don't run the same direction the whole entire time.
That's true too.
Switch directions.
That's a good note.
Yep. And in the same sense, if you're going to run on a treadmill, don't run with the deck flat the whole entire time every time you run. Use the incline just a little bit here and there. You don't have to do it a lot, but moving it up and down throughout a run just a little bit is going to help. And all of this is because our bodies want to form single patterns and follow them over and over. That is how the mind-muscle connection works. And so if we form a single connection that is not a productive connection, it becomes harder to reform that. And so this is why we start with movement. That's why that was the first topic that we addressed at the very beginning, but also why we remind of it now, which is avoid those kinds of things that create bad established patterns. That's good. Good reminders, Andy. So that's it. We're wrapping up the series now. There's plenty of other things that you could think about when you're starting and restarting, but we thought these are the foundational elements that are imperative because they're always coming up for all of us. And as you go through these kinds of things, this is also the type of stuff that is very much context dependent. So you have to understand that even though we're giving some general suggestions here, your situation in its particulars is not necessarily going to solicit the same suggestions as someone else's in some other situation. And so, always good to seek other opinions when you're experiencing things that you don't know exactly what to do about.
Well, that was riveting. I liked this series, especially because it's so relevant to me. Does that sound selfish? Yeah. It's relevant. And hopefully it can be helpful to all of you too. I hope that you're not in a season of, injury where you're needing to restart from zero. But as we've learned, runners do have bumps in the road. And so I do think that this can be valuable to anybody, any runners out there at some point on your running journey. Now, you've all been waiting for this. Let's talk about the crazy updates from the world of running.
All right, let's start with some A to Z runner updates because there is racing happening, even though it is the dead of winter in
Where we live.
in most parts of this current area in the world. And so the Groundhog Day half marathon is one of those events that a number of our people did, and Dan was first in his age group.
Woot woot.
Shout out, nice work, Dan. Grace and Chris both ran. They were just running together, having a good time. Craig ran, although he was actually running with one of his friends who was doing the marathon, but he only did half of it. And so he ran the half marathon. Nice work, Craig, helping a friend out. Always love it. And Ben was out there running too. Always good to see Ben out there running. And many others of you listening right now were there, and it apparently was a good time. I wouldn't know. I'm not generally one to run in winter events most of the time.
I don't know. You do.
On a
couple a
rare
year.
occasion. Yep.
We have the Mesa Marathon where Maria ran a 3-minute PR, which was fantastic. It had been a while since she got that PR, and so it's cool to see her just getting fitter and fitter, stronger and stronger.
Yep. Well done, Maria. That was very cool. Black Canyon 100K, known as one of the most competitive 100Ks, certainly in the United States, is where Erin ran her debut. And since it was a debut, it was a personal best, although she also far exceeded her initial goals and expectations, which is always exciting. Always exciting. Congrats, Erin. That's incredible. And then at Grand Valley State University, the Mike Lentz Open. This was an indoor track and field meet because A to Z runners do everything. We do it all. That's great. CJ ran an indoor mile personal best when he ran 4:20. 4:20.
So fast, CJ.
Technically also an official track PR overall, but only because he has run faster, but it was not an officially timed event. So there you go. CJ's starting the season off well on an unplanned race as well.
Well, more track is happening. There was so much this past weekend, and we're just going to dive right into it because it was so good.
The problem is we also have to tell you about the stuff that happened the weekend before that, too.
Right.
And so that's why we just
put
have so much
ourselves
to talk
in this
about. We did. We put
news
ourselves
pickle.
in this problem. So let's talk about the weekend of February 1st first, because there were a couple different key meets that produced a number of significant results. The Boston meet at BU, as well as the New Balance Indoor Grand Prix, which is also in Boston, I realized. So they're both Boston meets. But anyway, Ethan Strand of North Carolina, you recall he ran the collegiate 3,000-meter record in December, now ran the collegiate 1-mile record to add to his repertoire when he ran 3:48.32, good for, at the time of running, number 3 in the world ever.
Wow.
As a collegiate. Very impressive. Also, 2 seconds under the previous record, which is really exciting.
But I guess that kind of makes sense if it's number 3 world all time.
Yeah, it was very fast. It was very fast. Ethan Strand is just firing on all cylinders, as they say. Behind him, Germany's Robert Farken, by the way, broke the German record on his attempt to break the European record, but he did break it. And then there were also, 3 guys total under 350, which has only ever happened one time before this at the Milrose Games in 2024, when there were 4 guys under 350. We're talking indoors, of course, but that's significant. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Boston, they say it's a fast track. Apparently they're right.
Shelby Houlihan, you've heard us talk about her before.
This was her debut, or her return debut that everyone was talking about.
And, I mean, she really is back. There's no denying that this woman can run, running a solo 3,000 in 8:31. But that's not all.
Which was fast, but then a week later ran her second return debut in a mile. I don't remember where she ran. And she ran 4:20. Good for number 2 ever in the United States in indoor track. And it's only her second race in, 5 years. So that tells you right there all you need to know.
There's lots of controversy surrounding Shelby Houlihan, but it is running news, and it's important to keep you updated on Shelby Houlihan because she is a factor. And when she steps into track meets, she is often a factor. So, I mean, she's showing that she's really out to hunt down lost time.
Yeah, and this is one of those things. You can get in a room full of 7 runners, and chances are you're going to have a 50-50 split on who likes Shelby Houlihan. And
right.
I did deliberately say an odd number and then say 50-50 split, because there's a whole bunch of people that really don't
Unsure.
know how they
Unsure,
feel about it.
yeah.
All right. So that's Shelby Houlihan in her first 2 weeks back, and there's just more to come. But then also George Mills over in Europe was, doing fast things. He is a British runner, naturally, and he ran the new British 3,000-meter record in a solo run of 7:27.92.
The thing that is so impressive is that many people know who Josh Kerr is and how good Josh Kerr is. Well, it was Kerr's record that Mills broke.
It's fast. 7:27 is not anything to shake a stick at. So George Mills on the scene. And chances are we're going to see him at the World Indoor Meet here. And there's a good question around what he does there, too. Mm-hmm. So then in the same weekend, we're still talking about February 1st, or weekend of February 1st, was the New Balance Indoor Grand Prix, which was notable for essentially two particular races that people were talking the most about. One was the women's 3,000, in part because it was Parker Valby's pro debut, making her first ever
I think
race
it's so
as a
interesting
professional.
that it's her pro debut because she was at the Olympics. It kind of makes you think.
Yeah, but she was still wearing a Florida shirt that season.
And then she's wearing the U.S. jersey.
I know.
But because it feels like she's already turned pro, but this truly is her debut.
Yes. As she signed with New Balance, it makes sense she would debut at the New Balance Indoor Grand Prix. And
probably part of the contract.
She didn't do all that bad.
No.
She did run. She finished in third place in the race behind Britain's Melissa Courtney Bryant, who won. It was a very impressive win. She won with an 8:28, very strong 9-second PR. And then Elise Cranny of the United States was second, just a touch behind Courtney Bryant.
Which, in my world, that was a bit of an upset. I thought Elise Cranny would win.
You did?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did. Yeah. Well, Parker Valby ran a handful of seconds behind the two of them in 8:34, good for a 6-second personal best.
Okay.
So take
Great.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other race in the New Balance Indoor Grand Prix that caught a lot of attention was Cam Myers running in the men's 3,000 because he ran 7:33 and only missed the world under 20 record by a few tenths of a second.
Oh, so he missed it.
Missed it, but still set an outright Australian national record.
What?
So he missed the world under 20, but he set an Australian all ages record.
Maybe he knew and he was like, that's why he was all kind of like sad.
Well,
and dismissive.
No, that was the other one. That was when he ran that mile a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
We didn't see him after this one.
Okay.
But I should mention that even though he did break that Australian record, Kai Robinson broke it back a week later.
Oh,
so
wow.
It didn't last long. We'll talk about that here next. All right.
Now,
so,
Milrose.
Let's talk about Milrose. This is how I can summarize Milrose. Some people spent their Sunday night on February 9th watching the Super Bowl. I would say that the better thing to have done Sunday night watching the Super Bowl would instead to have watched the Milrose games twice over again. Because you could have watched it twice in the time the Super Bowl took, and it was way better.
It was so good. It was so good.
And everyone's going to be like, Zach, whatever. The Super Bowl, it's like football. And yeah, but this is track. Okay, the men's 3,000. Let's start. Okay, we've got a few different events we have to talk through, and they were all spectacular. Starting with the men's 3,000. We're just doing these in order of how they happened.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this was touted as a serious duel. Who were the duelists in the men's 3,000? Grant Fisher versus Cole Hocker. So a U.S. Olympic champion in the metric mile, versus the first American to medal in the 5,000 and 10,000 in Olympic Games since ever? I can't actually remember the stat.
And all his American records.
Yeah, well, and Grant Fisher holds all the records. And so those guys were battling it out in a 3,000, which is neither of their premier events, although people keep saying that, and I keep wanting to remind everyone, Grant Fisher was a miler before he was a distance runner, and he was a good one, and he holds the U.S. 3,000-meter record outdoors. Mm-hmm. So, like, the dude is a seriously good two-miler. I don't know why people keep saying, well, it's not like, they're meeting in the middle. They're not meeting in the middle. This is Grant Fisher's strength area still. And Cole Hocker's good too. So they're really just both running fast times of everything. So anyway, okay, here's what you got. Cole Hocker did the one thing that I never thought he would do in the race.
Hang?
No. I thought he could hang. It was his tactical move that was just incredible. So setting this, let me back up. Set this race up for a second.
He's just so excited.
I know. Jimmy Gressier of France, Kai Robinson of Australia, and the OAC, Ollie Hoare of Australia and the OAC, Stewie McSwain of Australia, Dylan Jacobs, US, OAC, Cooper Tier, Adam Fogg of Great Britain, Sean McGordy, and Alan Hacker are all in this race. This is one of the craziest indoor race rosters I've ever seen. It's really exciting stuff. And by the way, like all those people that I listed are all people that like win everything, basically. So that's the kind of field you've got here. And still everyone's just talking about Fisher and Hocker. And I keep thinking that's so funny because all these guys can win this race. Except they couldn't.
Maybe not.
Except they couldn't.
But maybe there was a reason that those two were talked about.
This is how races are run when they're not championship races. They set pacers and they go as fast as possible. And whoever wants the fastest pace is basically the one who gets it. So they set a pacer out at world record pace and said, take us through. And then as soon as the race starts and the pacer goes, who goes right behind the pacer? Grant Fisher. Because he has only one plan in this race: run fast. Mm-hmm. And so this is something Grant Fisher routinely does in these types of races. So he goes right behind the pacer. And you know what surprised me first?
What?
Cole Hocker goes right behind Grant Fisher. Cole Hocker is a savvy racer. And he never does more work than he has to until the last 400 meters of a race. But it was clear in his mind as well that that's the race to run. It was Grant Fisher and no one else. And you know that because of what he did. So tactically, the race just kind of strung out behind them, and it didn't take long to become evident that those were the two who were on the hunt. Because while others hung in for quite a while, they didn't look great, and they didn't hang in quite as long as you should be able to in this kind of a race. So it was just Fisher and Hocker until 600 meters to go, when Hocker moves around Fisher to take the lead. 600 meters to go. This is why I said the thing that I never would have expected. I never would have expected Hocker to take the lead far out in a race. Like, that's Grant Fisher's forte. That's what he does every time he wins a race. He takes the lead far out. And Hocker was like either just mad flexing in Grant Fisher's face, or he really thought like, this isn't fast enough. We need more. I don't know. But either way, Fisher was up for it, and it was awesome. Hocker takes the lead. Fisher just latches onto him, like probably gave him about 0.5 millimeter of space between the back of Hocker's spikes and Fisher's foreleg. And he's just right there. And just gave him no space. And Hocker kept them honest. He kept them accelerating. And with about 200 meters to go, you're thinking, okay, is Fisher going to make a move here? Like, does he have something else? And 200 meters is one lap on an indoor track. And so they come around the back, which means they basically have about 150 left. And Fisher looks like he's going to start trying to make a move. But he doesn't have it. Hocker also starts accelerating, and Fisher can't get around him. And so then everyone in the room, because we happen to be watching this meet with a lot of other people, everyone in the room is like, oh, it's Hocker. He's got the mad kick. It's going to happen. And they come around the bend. They've now got 50 meters to go. And in the last 50 meters of a race, if you were to say that anyone in the world right now would bet against Hocker, I would call your bluff. Nobody in the world right now would bet against Hocker in the final 50. And yet, Grant Fisher did it.
He did it.
Swung wide. He just slightly moved in front of him and held it across the line, which gave Grant Fisher, I am very pleased to announce, for the very first time on air on AtoZrunning, Grant Fisher set a new world record.
Woot woot.
Indoor 3,000 meters. Boom. World record goes to Grant Fisher. That's the first. He's had a lot of great successes. He's never broken a world record.
And I believe that it was truly a special race that this happened, because Cole Hocker also ran faster than the previous world record, pushing Grant Fisher to run faster. So the two of them being able to achieve this fast of a time globally is just absolutely bonkers. The two fastest men in the world at the 3,000 indoor.
You could say it over and over in any way you want, and I'll just keep nodding my head.
Yeah.
I'm drooling. I'm drooling right now.
So cool.
Fisher runs 7:22.91, besting Yamif Kejelch's world record. A quarter of a second behind him, Hocker runs 7:23.14 for the number 2 time ever in the world, also besting Yamif Kejelch's record. And 7 seconds later, third place comes across the line. These guys crushed it. It was insane. So in third place, Still running a seriously fast time of 7:30 was Jimmy Gressier of France for a new French record. And then in fourth place, only a couple tenths behind him, was Kai Robinson of Australia, beating Cam Myers' record for a new Australian record. And now you've got a race like that with records falling everywhere, world records galore.
But with the two that were like so far ahead of everybody else.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Well,
it is exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, the 3,000 for the women was an A-list race as well. We had the likes of Jessica Hall from Australia. You'll remember she's an Olympic medalist, national and world records for the 2,000 meter run.
She has other national records as well, and the world record in the 2,000.
Nozomi Tanaka, the Japanese woman who does it all. I feel like I was saying this at our party. It seems that she is always in the race and she never wins, but she's always good. Anyway, so she's in the race. I have a little more on her once we talk about the results.
Tanaka, by the way, I tried to count how many national records she has, Japanese records. And I couldn't quite figure it out. I got to 8, and then I started losing track of which events I'd already counted. So she has 8 or more national records.
That means that she has diversity in her portfolio, being able to run a variety of events and be the best at it in her country. Whitney Morgan, Olympic 5,000 meter runner. We have Josette Andrews, Sarah Healy of Ireland, Sigi Gabersalama from Ethiopia, Olivia Marketic, standout steeplechase runner, Caitlin Toohey, who you know. Standout high school, standout college, now running pro. And then Courtney Waymont, our U.S. Olympic steeplechaser. This race was pretty straightforward. 3 laps to go. Everyone's still tight.
Yeah, it was like 6 or more women in the race still with only a couple of laps left.
So it was a little different than the men's race. It wasn't going for the fastest of all time. It was not set to be a world record chasing race. Gebersalama kept it honest, but was like struggling. Usually she's up there.
She started signaling, right? She started signaling for someone to help out.
Her?
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you recall that? We commented on it when we were watching. We're like, what's she doing? And clearly she's like talking to the people behind her.
She wasn't wanting to lead anymore. She's struggling.
Yep. But what was interesting is as soon as she did that, in the back of the pack, who responded?
Andrews, right?
Josette Andrews. Mm-hmm. From the very back of the group, swings wide and goes all the way to the front.
Yeah. Yep. And made it just so deliberate. It was a really quick transition from her being at the back to the front and leading the race. Only Morgan responded quickly. The rest, I'm sure, regretted that because the race was happening right in that moment. And then it was with 150 to go that Morgan took the lead and charged ahead. And it was a very strong decision at that point. It was like, I'm going for the win. Yep. And ended up running 8:28, which is a number 5 U.S. all time. And then for second, Andrews, an 8:29, which is a number 7 U.S. all time. Mm-hmm. So they were within the same second.
Yep.
Third was an Irish record by Healy in 8:30, and Tanaka getting yet another Japanese record in 8:33. So what I was going to say about her is that she just keeps getting better and keeps hanging in it, but everyone else is
way
also
younger than we thought she was.
Yeah, she's way younger because she's been in the scene forever. Yep. It seems like, and she's only like, what was it, 25?
I don't know, but she was a teenage sensation, which we tend to forget.
Yep, it's but incredible. Keeps getting faster.
Right on. All right, well, let's talk about the men's 800 because it was touted as a duel between Bryce Hoppel and Josh Hoey for the U.S. 800 indoor record because Josh Hoey just broke the U.S. 1,000 meter indoor record, and so why wouldn't he potentially break this one too? We also know that record currently held at the time by Donovan Brazier. Bryce Hoppel either tied it or basically very nearly tied it, and so it's a pretty sure thing that there's a high likelihood someone's going to break it. They did talk about how Josh Hoey beat Grant Fisher in a 1,500 a week ago, and so it's like Hoey's strong.
Yeah.
For an 800 meter runner to best Grant Fisher in a miles, no small thing. And so, as it turns out, Bryce Hoppel wanted it fast, which is not surprising. That's kind of the way he does things, similar to Grant Fisher, actually. And Josh Hoey was game. So they go with the pacer, and then they go hard, and it ends up being a 2-man duel. And Josh Hoey, who's just on fire this season, continues his streak, takes the victory, narrowly beating out Hoppel, and he does get that U.S. record, ran 143.9, world number 3 all-time indoors. So his 1,000 is world number 2. Now his 800 is world number 3. This dude is having a season.
And these races were sensational because of the drama that these athletes were bringing. They were truly trying to win and go fast, which is super fun to have both those things happening at the same time, where two people want a record so badly and they're duking it out. It's just so fun. And it's so close. Like, this was a close race. You didn't know until the line who was going to win.
And speaking of records, they weren't the only ones. And that's part of what just makes these things so incredible. Like with the 3,000, behind them, more men were breaking records. In fourth, in particular, Mark English set a new Irish record. Don't get confused here. He is English and Irish, but for two different reasons. And he ran 145. And then in fifth, Alex Amankwa set a new Ghanaian record and ran 145 and change. And then behind them, in sixth place, was a high school sophomore from Texas by the name of Cooper Lutkenhouse, who ran a new high school 800-meter record, 146.86, which is also number 11 all-time in the world junior rankings, and is not a U.S. junior record only because Donovan Brazier ran under 146 when he was in college, as a freshman in college.
Gotcha.
But the point here is that Lutkenhouse broke the high school junior record, which was previously held by Josh Hoey, who won the race. Isn't that hilarious?
Coming full circle.
Oh, I love
in
it.
the
It's
same
so good.
race. That's so cool.
So good. So there you have it. The men's 800 was just as exciting as everything else, and then it got better.
Mm-hmm. Women's mile had an awesome field.
This is the headliner event for Millrose. They call it the Wanamaker Mile. It's the big deal.
Mm-hmm. Which is cool that the rest of them were so dynamic, and then getting to this point, you're already so hyped, so ready for big things. So the field was Georgia Bell from Great Britain, Susan Ajor from Kenya, Nikki Hiltz of the USA, of course, Heather McLean, Sinclair Johnson, Lyndon Hall, Maria Ramsden, and Sadie Engelhart.
Maya Ramsden.
Maya.
And I just realized I didn't put the country of origin for every one of the athletes, because Lyndon Hall is Australian, Maya Ramsden is New Zealander.
Oh, thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so you've got another race with a high schooler, too.
Yeah, another race with a high schooler. But this one, it was kind of interesting, and it does happen like this, so I'm not terribly surprised. But it was so bunched. It was kind of, I don't know if it actually went out slow, but it looked like it went out slow.
No, I looked at the splits. It went out really slow.
Okay.
So it was
That's
actually,
what it looked like.
It was kind of wild. The pacer goes out and then looks around and there's nobody around her. And she's like, what am I supposed to do here? Because they just didn't go with her. And our best guess in these kinds of situations is the people who everyone thought were like the ones who were there to run fast didn't try to go out. And so no one else was going to do it because they're like, oh, it's not my place to be the one leading this race. And so no one did. And that was kind of sad.
But, I mean, in the end, it kind of got chaotic, which is interesting.
It's for an exciting
for
second half.
the rest of us to see, but not super fun for the racers, I'm sure. Hiltz didn't push the pace, but that is,
does not like to push the pace.
Likes to kick in the end. Bell wasn't super confident, it seemed. Maybe also wanted a kicker's race. But Hall was eventually willing. It seemed that she was like waiting for someone else, and then finally I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna go for it.
And Lyndon Hall was the one who made the race at least not pedestrian.
Yeah.
She eventually went to the front and then put down a good, strong hold for a bit to start moving everyone along.
McLean was the first to move like in a decisive, let's get the ball rolling kind of way.
She made the move probably saying, okay, this is a kicker's race now because it's been so slow, but I don't want to try to outkick the rest of these people, and so I'm going to just go now. Mm-hmm. So she went early, but she went like this, I'm going now to try to win. And others noticed, and they did not let her get away with it. So it was Susan Ajore and Georgia Bell who most immediately responded.
Yeah, which was the thing that they needed to do. People needed to do that because otherwise, like Hiltz got stuck with 200 to go. And it ended up that Bell found herself in an optimal position with 100 to go and really capitalized on that. it was just chaos. McLean faded on the straight, but had been leading, and then it was Bell for the win in 4:23 on that straightaway. And then second, Ajori, and then third was Hiltz.
And then I realize now that I might have something wrong because I think McLean is in the top 3 there. But
I think it was Hiltz was 4th. That's what I think.
There was something messed up in the initial live results, and so I never quite confirmed exactly. But McLean's in the top 3 there somewhere.
Okay.
But Georgia Bell took the win very impressively in a very difficult type of race, that kickers race, championship style racing. So all that tells you is that's a good sign for Georgia Bell come World Indoor Championships if she's running it, because that's exactly the kind of race you're going to get in the World Championships.
Except it will go out faster, most likely, right?
It doesn't usually. It can sometimes, but it doesn't usually.
Yeah. Men's mile, you can go ahead and...
No. We got to both talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, the men's mile. Let's start by setting up the field for you. This was another one where they were talking about the duel for the ages, and it was Yared Nuguse. It was supposed to be Josh Kerr. Josh Kerr dropped out of the race last minute. Apparently he was ill.
He was sad that his record went down. Remember we talked earlier?
Oh, the other day, yeah. The other
race,
yeah. Well, anyway.
By George Mills.
George Mills broke his record, so he pouted. No. Yared Nuguse, world number 2 in the indoor mile. Multiple times, by the way. In the last couple of years, he's run the number 2 time in the world twice and not quite gotten that record. And by the way, also the 2-time defending Wanamaker Mile champion. Cam Myers, the teenage sensation from Australia, the world under 20 record holder from earlier this year. Azzedine Hobbs from France. He's an Olympian. He's the French record holder. Neil Gorley, British sensation, who's got a mean kick. Hobbs Kessler, you know how he finished 5th in the Olympics, and he's also the world number 5 all time in the indoor mile. Andrew Koskarin, an Irish sensation, has records there, and more. And that's the field for this men's Wanamaker Mile. Now, much like the men's 3,000, this race was scripted. Like, you could have written ahead of time exactly what was going to happen, and there's a good chance you could have called it correctly.
I wonder if some of these athletes visualized this happening exactly this way.
Could be.
And planned to take on the challenge just like this.
So pacers go out. Yared Nuguse goes with them. He's the first one to latch on. That is a classic. Yared Nuguse does that almost every time in the time trial type races like this. And then Hobbs Kessler is always the guy to be in top 3. He's never the one leading it. He never goes with the pacer, but he is never far behind either.
He likes to set himself up.
This dude is a savvy racer. I've been saying this since the beginning. Hobbs Kessler made some serious blunders in his first couple of pro races as a teenager, and yet learned some serious lessons.
Yeah, he's gotten to be...
He knows how to race.
Got to be very good at it.
So it just everyone else just fell in line behind him, and here they go. They set world record pace. That was the goal, and so that's what they went out at. They came through 800 and 153. 153. I think the first 400 they were on 345 pace.
Oh.
Like crazy. So at one point, when the pacer dropped out shortly after 800, it seemed like Nuguse kind of like chilled out a little bit. He was not keeping that aggressive pressure quite as much, but not for very long because nothing changed. Nuguse stayed in front. Kessler stayed behind him. Everyone else was strung out behind that, and it was just a grind. And then you start to ask who's going to have it. You know, are they going to be able to hold this? Nuguse definitely didn't look great. We kept talking about it, but Nuguse usually doesn't look great. He shows his emotions.
Possible.
He shows his emotions on his face when he's running. So you never know. He's running as fast as he can. And he's done this before. Keep in mind. He's run this kind of effort before. His outdoor mile especially is much faster than this. So with 100 meters to go, no change. Kessler was trying to make a race of it, but he just couldn't quite get around Nuguse, and he really couldn't even get quite up on him. Nuguse just held, kept pushing. They both stayed exactly like that all the way across the line. It was like start to finish, Nuguse and Kessler in that order. And both of them, just like Grant Fisher and Cole Hocker, both of them bested the previous world record. So now we get to now say for a second time on air today, an American setting a world record in the indoor track events here now for Yared Nuguse, running 3:46.63.
With a countryman right behind, having also gone under the previous world record.
And Hobbs Kessler, just like Fisher and Hocker, he was a quarter second behind Nuguse, like Hocker was a quarter second behind Fisher, ran number 2 all time in the world, only the second man under 3:47. in an indoor mile. But
that's not the only top 10 performance in the world. Myers ran an Australian record, a world U20 record, and the 4th all-time.
you got to pause here for a second. She's talking about an 18-year-old Cam Myers who finished 3rd in the Wanamaker Mile. His kick was savage.
It was so good.
And he just ran a 3-second personal best.
Yep.
To run 3:47 and number 4 all-time indoors as an 18-year-old.
Yep.
Dude.
Amazing.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder if the other Aussies who were in the 3,000 were like, oh, we should have been in that race?
Maybe, because there's a couple milers in there.
Yeah. Well, in 4th place was Hobbs from France, who ran a new French record, and number 5 all-time, also in 3:47 and change. Are you detecting a record? By the way, en route to that mile, he also was granted an official 1,500-meter French record because they had a timing set up at the 1,500-meter mark.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
And then Gary Martin of the United States, collegian for Virginia, ran 5th place, number 2 collegian all-time, running 3:48.82, just a hair slower than what Ethan Strand ran a week ago.
We're living in crazy times because he was still number 8 in the world. Still a top 10 world ever performance.
As a collegian.
As a collegian.
And a fairly young collegian at that, by the way. And then in 7th place was Andrew Koskarin for a new Irish record. And yes, they gave him the 1,500-meter Irish record as well. And then, by the way, Farken from Germany, who set that, if you recall, the mile record not long ago. He was going for it again here, but missed it, and yet was strong enough through 1,500 to get the 1,500 record, even though he faded over the final 100. So there you go.
Still got a record. So
8
that's cool.
men. 8 men, Andy, ran under 3:50 in one race. 4 men ran under 3:48 in one race. Remember what I said? Before last year, no more than 3 had ever run under 3:50 in a race indoors. Now we've got 8 in this one. Wow. I'm just having a hard time. 4 guys were in the top 5 all time in this race. So it's just, we know things are changing rapidly right now. We keep saying this, but that's not going to continue forever.
Well, I have to say, I saw somewhere that Ingebrigtsen is racing this week. And,
he is?
Or in the next couple weeks.
This coming weekend, yep.
Okay, this coming weekend. You said it like, really? So I was second guessing myself. But people are wondering, is he going to try to hunt down Yard's new world record?
Yes.
Probably.
He is.
So will this happen again? Maybe this weekend.
We will find out. Oh, by the way, the 2025 Outdoor World Championships qualification standard is 3:50 this year. And we've had like 14 guys run that time. Not quite 14. 12 guys run that time this year already, which makes you wonder if that mark just is not fast enough anymore.
That's nuts.
You're not supposed to have lots of people qualifying with the world championship time anymore because they want you qualifying on rankings. So there you have it. What a meet. That's why the Super Bowl was a waste of time if you hadn't already seen Milrose, because this was the real sports news of the weekend. All right, so I got just a couple of other things that I got to run down here before we're done because so much is happening. First, Hiroki Wakabayashi of Japan, the college runner who decided to run one marathon before he quit to get a real job, in his words, or something like that. And so he ran his marathon, his one and only, in his words, and he ran it in 2:06:07.
Come on. It can't be your last one, dude.
And then after the race, they said, but is this really your last one? He's like, yeah, that's my plan. And what do you think he said about 2 weeks later? Well, maybe he's going to run professionally.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
so
maybe it was a stunt so that somebody would reach out from a company and say, but wait, there's more.
Actually, though, he's not the only, in recent memory, Japanese marathoner to do exactly that. And one of them went on to be quite famous. And I think what it amounts to is there's a lot of really fast runners in Japan.
Yeah, there are.
Distance runners. And so it's not terribly special to be a college distance runner, be really, really fast in Japan. But it's also very difficult to make a living unless you are one of the
Like
best.
Anywhere, though.
Because there's so you can't be a 2:12 marathoner in Japan and be like a full-time professional runner, because there's tons of 2:12 marathoners in Japan. Now that might be a bad example, because you actually might be able to by that standard, but it's just not the same. And so anyway, here he is now potentially walking back that retirement decision. Finally, the last thing to cover today is, what in the world is Nike doing with its professional teams?
Something different.
So Nike had Bowerman Track Club, no more. And Nike had a smattering of other athletes and other things going on in other places, no more. Nike has consolidated all its pro teams under one umbrella that they're now calling Swoosh TC. And Swoosh TC is a shared umbrella. So whoever you have been running with in the past, you're not bound to that. And so they have now these hubs, and the hubs all have a coach. The hubs are based around the coach who is already living there. That's just the reality of it. So the hubs have a coach and then a network of facilities and like locations and people to help you out. And the Nike athletes can just move between them, which is a very interesting thing, right? And so you've got Diljit Taylor in Provo, Utah, which she is the head women's coach of BYU, Brigham Young, and she has been highly successful,
very successful
as a collegiate coach, and more recently with some of these post-college runners.
Yep.
Whitney Morgan, she's also a Diljit Taylor. But notably, all of her pro runners presently, with possibly the exception of one, are all recent BYU grads. And so she's been able to just continue coaching them, and they've been quite successful. So now they're kind of building a hub around her for that. And then they've got Mike Smith in Flagstaff. He was the coach of NAU, the famous coach of NAU who won all the stuff, and now has retired from college coaching to only coach professionally. And so he'll be doing that as a kind of focal point for Nike's groups in Flagstaff. And then you have Jerry Schumacher, who was the coach of Bowerman Track Club, but is now the head coach at Oregon for track and cross country. And he will continue to be a Nike pro coach as well, based now out of Eugene. And so you have those three different places. And if you're a Nike athlete and you want to spend some time in Flagstaff, you go to Flagstaff for a bit, and Mike Smith's there to help you out. And all of their stuff, they've got doctors, they've got PTs, they've got everybody they need. They have networks in each of these locations. So it's a kind of consolidation of resources, which makes sense. It's a kind of weird, like, you don't have to run for Jerry if you don't like Jerry. You can just go run for Diljit and Provo instead. Like, you could just do that as one of these Nike athletes now.
Interesting.
Which is kind of weird.
I don't think that's very cohesive to, like, be bouncing back and forth.
Well, maybe, but a lot of times athletes talk about how it's important to just, like, not do the same thing for year after year.
That's true, but it would need to be, like, for an extended amount of time to see if there's actually any to be able to realize the differences.
But here's the craziest part, because all of that is kind of odd, but there's an actual part here that's like, oh, I don't know how this is going to work out.
Yeah.
These coaches, with the exception of Schumacher, don't coach Nike athletes restrictively. As a matter of fact, I don't know if any of Diljit Taylor's athletes. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if any of Diljit Taylor's athletes are Nike athletes. Brigham Young is Nike sponsored as a school, but I don't think any of her pro athletes are. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then Mike Smith, his most famous athletes, like Nikki Hiltz runs for Mike Smith, and Nico Young, his famous athletes are not Nike athletes. And so
that would be so tough as an athlete.
No, because here's what happens. Now, Swoosh TC coaches, those three mentioned, if you want to be coached by them and you're currently not a Nike athlete, you can and have access to your facilities until you finish out your current contract, and then you must switch to Nike.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's
tough to keep your coach.
Because there's some that just don't want to run for Nike.
It doesn't matter. The point is that is a bully move against these other brands, because now they're saying if you want to be coached by your own coach, you cannot unless you're Nike.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That stinks for those athletes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's terrible. Because a lot of them are in contracts that would not allow for them to do that.
Well, no, they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild, is it not?
It's wild.
We'll find out.
Which is smart, I guess, on Nike's part.
Yeah.
Like, let's snatch these awesome coaches and then hopefully get some of those top
Obviously,
tier athletes as well.
Obviously, the coaches had to agree with it. So Nike was offering these coaches, oodles, which they will in these kinds of situations. And so, it's kind of Mike Smith's fault if he angers his own athletes who are like, I don't want to run for Nike, because he accepted it.
Right.
But that's the way these things go.
But there is part of the thing that I think motivated them to create this like team sort of scenario again, because they've always had these really good teams, is because they work. So having the momentum of teammates spurring each other along and getting better and better, and having, even if they're not like always training together, if they're coached by the same person, they feel a camaraderie. And so in that way, they're all working towards the same thing. And then that makes Nike look good if they have this group that's succeeding.
Which we know really is the reason Nike does anything at all.
To win.
To make Nike look good. So we'll see.
Make money.
We'll see how this unfolds. This is a very strange scenario in the modern world of track and field, but strange is always interesting at the very least. And with that, we have been talking about how to get started or restarted. We hope that series was helpful, but we're going to move on to some new content here soon. So always come back around for the next one, because you're going to get some more interesting stuff.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.